The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain as Sergeant Mike Rodriguez adjusted his radio equipment one more time. His team of 4 forest rangers had been tracking illegal poachers for 3 days through the remote wilderness of Montana's Glacier National Park. The intelligence reports suggested a well-organized group had been systematically hunting protected wildlife, leaving behind evidence of their brutal efficiency. Sarah Chen crouched behind a cluster of pine trees, her binoculars focused on the valley below. As the team's wildlife specialist, she had seen the devastating aftermath of poaching operations before. But this group seemed different. More organized. More dangerous. The tracks they had been following showed at least 6 individuals, all well-equipped and moving with military precision. "Movement at 2 o'clock, Sarah whispered into her radio, her voice barely audible even to herself. Through the lenses, she could make out figures moving methodically through the underbrush, carrying what appeared to be high-powered rifles and sophisticated tracking equipment. These weren't amateur hunters looking for trophy kills. These were professionals. Rodriguez felt his stomach tighten as he received Sarah's transmission. 3 months earlier, another ranger team had encountered a similar group 50 miles south. That confrontation had ended with 2 rangers in the hospital, and the poachers vanishing without a trace. The local sheriff's department had warned all park personnel to avoid direct engagement and call for backup immediately if contact was made. Tommy Martinez, the youngest member of their team, had been unusually quiet during their trek. At 26, he had joined the Ranger Service straight from college, full of idealism about protecting nature and wildlife. The reality of facing armed criminals in the wilderness was far different from what he had imagined during his training sessions. His hands trembled slightly as he checked his sidearm, a standard-issue pistol that seemed inadequate against the weapons he had glimpsed through Sarah's binoculars. The 4th team member, veteran Ranger James Big Jim Thompson, had 30 years of experience in law enforcement before joining the Park Service. His weathered face showed the concern of someone who had seen too many dangerous situations escalate beyond control. He positioned himself strategically behind a large boulder, providing overwatch for the rest of the team while maintaining clear sight lines to multiple escape routes. As the morning progressed, the poachers moved closer to the Rangers' position. Sarah's observations revealed their systematic approach to the hunt. They had set up a sophisticated operation, complete with radio communications, coordinated movements, and what appeared to be temporary camps hidden throughout the area. This wasn't a simple poaching expedition. It was a full-scale commercial operation designed to harvest as much wildlife as possible before authorities could respond. Rodriguez made the difficult decision to call for backup. His radio crackled to life as he transmitted their coordinates to the regional command center. The response was immediate but troubling. The nearest law enforcement backup was at least 4 hours away, and helicopter support wasn't available due to severe weather conditions moving in from the west. They were essentially on their own until evening. The tension among the Rangers increased as they realized their isolated position. The poachers had unknowingly surrounded them on 3 sides, using natural terrain features to mask their approach. Sarah's wildlife expertise became crucial as she identified game trails and water sources that the criminals would likely target, helping her team predict their movements and avoid direct confrontation. Tommy's nervousness was becoming apparent to the entire team. His breathing had become shallow and rapid, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool mountain air. Big Jim moved closer to the young ranger, offering quiet words of encouragement while keeping his eyes fixed on the approaching threat. The veteran's calm presence helped stabilize Tommy's nerves, but everyone knew their situation was deteriorating rapidly. The sound of gunshots echoing through the valley confirmed their worst fears. The poachers had found their targets and were actively hunting protected species. Each shot represented not just the illegal killing of wildlife, but also evidence of the criminals' willingness to use deadly force. Rodriguez felt the weight of responsibility for his team's safety, while knowing they couldn't simply retreat and allow the destruction to continue. As the sun climbed higher, casting harsh shadows across the rocky landscape, the 4 Rangers found themselves trapped between their duty to protect the wildlife and their need to survive until reinforcements arrived. The radio chatter from the poachers, intercepted on their scanner, revealed a level of organization and ruthlessness that none of them had anticipated. They were facing a professional criminal operation with military-grade equipment and tactics. Sarah's hands steadied as she continued her surveillance, documenting the poacher's activities for the investigation that would surely follow. Her camera captured images of the criminals' faces, equipment, and methods, creating crucial evidence for prosecution. But she also noticed something else through her binoculars that made her blood run cold. One of the poachers was setting up what appeared to be a high-powered sniper rifle on a ridge overlooking their position. The criminal had somehow detected their presence and was preparing to eliminate the witnesses to their illegal operation. The hunters had become the hunted, and the Rangers realized they were running out of time and options. Rodriguez keyed his radio one more time, knowing that their next transmission might be their last chance to call for help. The static-filled response from headquarters seemed impossibly distant as the reality of their situation became clear. They were 4 lightly armed park rangers facing a well-equipped criminal organization in one of the most remote areas of the American wilderness, with backup hours away and a storm approaching that would make rescue operations nearly impossible. The radio crackled to life with Rodriguez's urgent transmission to headquarters. "Base, this is Ranger Team Alpha. We have visual confirmation of at least 6 armed subjects engaged in illegal hunting activities. Request immediate backup and air support. Our position is compromised and subjects appear to have military-grade equipment." The response came through layers of static, made worse by the approaching storm system. "Alpha Team, this is Base. Understood your situation. Closest ground units are 4 hours out. Weather conditions have grounded all aircraft until further notice. Maintain surveillance and avoid engagement. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary for survival." Big Jim Thompson felt his jaw clench as he listened to the transmission. 4 hours might as well be 4 days in their current situation. He had seen enough combat during his military service to recognize the signs of a well-coordinated enemy force. These poachers moved with the precision of former soldiers, using hand signals and tactical formations that suggested professional training. Sarah Chen adjusted her position behind the pine cluster, trying to get a better view of the sniper setting up on the ridge. Through her binoculars, she could see him methodically assembling a rifle that looked military in origin. The scope alone probably cost more than most people made in a month. This wasn't some weekend hunter with a grudge against park regulations. This was someone who killed for a living. Tommy Martinez tried to control his breathing as he watched the drama unfold. His ranger training had covered confrontations with angry campers and lost hikers, not armed criminals who appeared ready to eliminate witnesses. The weight of his sidearm felt both reassuring and inadequate as he considered the firepower they were facing. His college professors had never mentioned situations like this in their wildlife management courses. The poacher's radio chatter, intercepted through the ranger's scanner, revealed disturbing details about their operation. They spoke in code words and military terminology, referring to coordinates, extraction points, and something called the package that needed to be secured before the cleanup. Sarah felt sick as she realized they might be witnessing more than simple poaching. This could be an international wildlife trafficking operation worth millions of dollars. Rodriguez made quick calculations in his head. The storm front would hit in approximately 2 hours, bringing heavy rain and reduced visibility. The poachers would likely try to complete their operation and evacuate before conditions deteriorated. That gave his team a narrow window to either escape or find a way to stop the criminals without getting killed in the process. The sniper on the ridge completed his rifle assembly and began scanning the area where the Rangers were hidden. Big Jim recognized the methodical search pattern and realized they had perhaps minutes before their position was discovered. He made hand signals to the rest of the team, indicating they needed to move immediately to avoid detection. Sarah gathered her camera equipment and documentation while keeping low to avoid skylining herself against the ridge. The evidence she had collected could put these criminals away for decades, but only if she survived to deliver it to prosecutors. She stuffed the memory cards into a waterproof pouch and secured it inside her jacket, knowing it might be the only way to ensure their sacrifice wouldn't be meaningless. Tommy followed Big Jim's lead as they began moving to a new position using available cover. The young ranger's legs felt weak, but adrenaline kept him focused on each step. He tried to remember his training about moving silently through forest terrain, avoiding dead branches and loose rocks that might give away their location. Every sound seemed magnified in the tense atmosphere. The poachers below had split into 2 groups. One team continued their hunting activities, while the other began a systematic search of the area where they suspected the Rangers might be hiding. Their coordination was flawless, suggesting they had worked together for years. Radio communications between the groups used professional terminology that confirmed Sarah's suspicion about their military backgrounds. Rodriguez reached a small clearing where he could get better radio reception and tried once more to contact headquarters. Base, this is Alpha Team. Subjects have detected our presence and are actively hunting us. We need immediate extraction or we're going to have casualties. Stormfront approaching in approximately 90 minutes. The response was clearer this time, but no more encouraging. Alpha Team Base copies your situation. All available units are en route but still hours away. You are authorized to use any means necessary to protect yourselves and civilians. Local law enforcement has been notified and is attempting to coordinate with state police for emergency response. Big Jim heard the transmission and understood what it really meant. They were on their own until the cavalry arrived, and there was no guarantee any of them would be alive when help finally reached their location. He had been in similar situations during his military service, but at least then he had been properly armed and equipped for combat. Park rangers weren't supposed to fight wars against professional criminals. Sarah noticed movement on their flanks as the poachers began surrounding their new position. The criminals were using classic military tactics, establishing fields of fire and cutting off escape routes. She realized with growing dread that these weren't just poachers who had stumbled onto their presence. They had been deliberately hunting the rangers from the moment they detected the surveillance operation. The first raindrops began falling as the storm front moved closer to their position. The weather would provide both advantages and disadvantages for the rangers. Reduced visibility might help them escape detection, but it would also make navigation more difficult and eliminate any chance of air support or rescue. They were about to be trapped in a deadly game of hide-and-seek with professional killers in some of the most remote wilderness in North America. Tommy's radio picked up new chatter from the poachers that made everyone's blood run cold. They were discussing permanent solutions to their witness problem and making references to previous situations where they had cleaned up loose ends. The young ranger finally understood that they weren't just facing illegal hunters. They were up against people who had killed before and wouldn't hesitate to kill again to protect their operation. The sound of footsteps crushing dried leaves grew closer as the search teams narrowed their perimeter. Rodriguez made the difficult decision that would determine whether his team lived or died. He keyed his radio one final time, knowing that their next move would either save them or seal their fate in the Montana wilderness. The desperate radio call went out across multiple channels as Rodriguez pressed the emergency beacon on his radio. Any station, this is Park Ranger Team Alpha requesting immediate assistance. We are under attack by armed subjects at coordinates 47.32 north, 114.89 west. We need all available units and medical support. This is not a drill. Miles away, in a remote cabin nestled against the mountainside, Elena Vasquez heard the transmission through her ham radio setup. The former Army sniper had been monitoring emergency frequencies as part of her volunteer work with mountain rescue operations. Something about the urgency in the ranger's voice made her blood run cold. She had heard that same desperation during her 3 tours in Afghanistan, when soldiers called for help that might never come. Elena quickly plotted the coordinates on her topographic map, her trained mind automatically calculating distances, elevation changes, and optimal routes. The ranger's position was approximately 12 miles from her cabin, most of it through rough terrain that would challenge even experienced hikers. But Elena wasn't just an experienced hiker. She was one of the best marksmen the Army had ever trained, with confirmed kills at distances most people couldn't even see clearly. Back at the ranger's position, the situation had deteriorated rapidly. The poachers had tightened their perimeter and were now actively hunting the 4 law enforcement officers with military precision. Big Jim Thompson used hand signals to direct his team toward a rocky outcropping that might provide better defensive positions. But he knew they were only delaying the inevitable confrontation. Sarah Chen clutched her camera equipment and evidence files as she followed Tommy Martinez through the underbrush. The documentation she had gathered could destroy the entire poaching network, but only if they survived long enough to deliver it to prosecutors. She could hear the criminals calling to each other in the distance, their voices growing closer with each passing minute. Tommy's hands shook as he checked his ammunition supply, 18 rounds in his service pistol and 1 spare magazine. Against 6 heavily armed professionals with military-grade weapons, it seemed laughably inadequate. His ranger training had emphasized de-escalation and calling for backup, not engaging in firefights with organized criminals in remote wilderness areas. Elena Vasquez made her decision in less than 30 seconds. She grabbed her custom rifle case, emergency medical kit, and tactical gear from the secure locker in her bedroom. The weapon inside the case was a precision instrument that had saved American lives in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. Today, it might save the lives of 4 park rangers who had stumbled into a situation far beyond their training and equipment. The former sniper's pickup truck roared to life as she began the treacherous journey toward the rangers' coordinates. The mountain roads were rough under ideal conditions, but with rain beginning to fall and visibility decreasing, the drive became a test of skill and determination. Elena had made similar journeys under enemy fire in Afghanistan. This time, she was racing to help fellow Americans facing death in their own country. Rodriguez tried to establish radio contact with any available support units, while his team took defensive positions among the rocks. The static-filled responses from various agencies painted a grim picture. Local law enforcement was still hours away. State police couldn't launch helicopters in the deteriorating weather, and federal agents were tied up with other emergencies across the region. The poachers' radio chatter revealed their growing impatience with the situation. They had expected to complete their operation and leave the area before anyone discovered their presence. The Rangers' surveillance had complicated their timeline, and now they were discussing the necessity of eliminating witnesses before extracting from the area. Their conversations made it clear that killing law enforcement officers was just another business problem to be solved. Sarah heard footsteps approaching their position and pressed herself against a large boulder, trying to become invisible. Through a gap in the rocks, she could see one of the poachers moving methodically through the area, his rifle at the ready. He wore military-style clothing and moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to hunting human prey. The sight made her stomach turn as she realized how outmatched they were. Elena's truck bounced violently as she navigated the mountain trail at dangerous speeds. Her GPS showed she was still 8 miles from the ranger's position, but the terrain ahead was too rough for vehicle travel. She would have to cover the remaining distance on foot, carrying her rifle and equipment through increasingly difficult conditions. The rain was falling harder now, turning the trail into a muddy obstacle course. Big Jim Thompson made the tactical decision that their defensive position was untenable. The poachers had superior numbers, better weapons, and the advantage of surprise. Their only chance was to keep moving and try to reach a more defensible location higher up the mountain. He signaled to his team to prepare for movement, knowing that leaving cover would make them vulnerable to the sniper they had spotted earlier. Tommy Martinez felt his legs trembling as he prepared to move. Every ranger training exercise had emphasized the importance of cover and concealment, but now they were about to expose themselves to deadly fire from multiple directions. He tried to remember his father's advice about staying calm under pressure, drawing on memories of their hunting trips together when he was young. The radio crackled with another transmission from headquarters, bringing news that was both encouraging and terrifying. Additional ranger teams were being dispatched from 3 different stations, but their estimated arrival time was still several hours away. More importantly, intelligence reports suggested the poaching ring they had encountered was connected to a larger criminal organization that had been operating across multiple states. Elena abandoned her truck at the end of the mountain road and began the brutal climb toward the Rangers' coordinates. Her pack contained enough ammunition to fight a small war, along with medical supplies and emergency equipment. The rifle case was perfectly balanced despite its weight, a testament to years of carrying similar loads through hostile territory. She moved with the steady pace of someone who understood that speed would be useless if she arrived too exhausted to fight effectively. Rodriguez made the decision to move his team toward higher ground, hoping to find a position that would allow them to hold out until reinforcements arrived. As they prepared to leave their rocky shelter, he had no way of knowing that help was already racing toward them through the storm. Elena Vasquez was still 6 miles away, but her reputation as one of the Army's deadliest snipers was about to be put to the ultimate test in defense of 4 strangers who desperately needed a miracle. Elena Vasquez moved through the rain-soaked forest with the silent efficiency of a predator. Her boots found secure footing on wet rocks and slippery logs as she climbed steadily toward the coordinates, where 4 park rangers were fighting for their lives. The rifle case on her back contained a custom-built weapon that had never missed its target when human lives hung in the balance. Today would not be the first time. The former Army sniper paused at a creek crossing to check her GPS and listen for sounds of the conflict ahead. Through the rain and wind, she could hear the distant crack of gunfire echoing off the mountain peaks. The shots came in disciplined patterns rather than panicked bursts, confirming her suspicion that the Rangers were facing professional killers, not amateur poachers. Rodriguez felt a bullet splinter bark from a tree inches from his head as his team made their desperate dash for higher ground. The poachers had opened fire when the Rangers broke cover, and only their erratic movement through dense undergrowth had prevented immediate casualties. Tommy Martinez stumbled and nearly fell, but Big Jim Thompson grabbed his arm and pulled him toward a cluster of large boulders. Sarah Chen clutched her evidence files against her chest as she ran, knowing that the documentation inside could bring down an entire criminal network if she survived to deliver it. A rifle bullet cracked past her ear with a sound like an angry wasp, reminding her that survival was far from guaranteed. The poachers were closing in from multiple directions, their voices coordinating the hunt through professional military communications. The sniper on the ridge had finally acquired a clear shot at the fleeing Rangers. Through his high-powered scope, he tracked Rodriguez as the sergeant tried to reach cover behind a fallen log. His finger tightened on the trigger just as a voice in his earpiece ordered him to hold fire. The leader of the poaching operation wanted the Rangers taken alive for questioning about what they had seen and reported to their headquarters. Elena reached a vantage point that gave her a clear view of the valley below. Through her binoculars, she could see muzzle flashes from multiple positions as the poachers maintained steady pressure on the Rangers' retreat. Her trained eye immediately identified the tactical situation and began formulating a plan of attack. The criminals had made a crucial mistake by revealing their positions through sustained fire. Tommy Martinez felt his lungs burning as they climbed higher into the rocky terrain. His legs shook with exhaustion and fear, but the sound of pursuing footsteps kept him moving despite the pain. Behind them, he could hear the poachers calling to each other, their voices filled with the confidence of hunters closing in on wounded prey. The young ranger wondered if his parents would ever learn what happened to him in these remote mountains. Big Jim Thompson's military experience told him they were being herded into a trap. The poachers were driving them toward a specific location where they could be surrounded and captured or killed. He signaled to Rodriguez, indicating they needed to change direction and break the pattern the criminals expected them to follow. But their options were limited by the terrain and their exhausted condition. Elena opened her rifle case with practiced efficiency, assembling her weapon with movements refined by thousands of repetitions. The custom bolt-action rifle had been built to her exact specifications, with modifications that allowed for precision shooting in adverse weather conditions. She had used similar weapons to protect American soldiers from distances that seemed impossible to civilian minds. Sarah Chen reached the temporary safety of a large rock formation and immediately began transmitting their situation to headquarters. "Base, this is Alpha Team Member Chen. We are taking heavy fire from multiple subjects with automatic weapons. Sergeant Rodriguez is wounded but mobile. We need immediate evacuation and medical support. These are not ordinary poachers. They have military training and equipment." The response from headquarters brought both hope and frustration. Additional resources were being mobilized, including FBI agents familiar with international wildlife trafficking operations. But weather conditions continued to prevent air support, and ground units were still hours away from reaching their remote location. The 4 Rangers would have to survive on their own until help could fight through the storm. Rodriguez tried to bandage a bullet graze on his arm while maintaining overwatch for his team. The wound wasn't serious, but blood loss and shock were already affecting his coordination. He knew they couldn't keep running indefinitely. They needed to find a defensive position and make a stand. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned by professional killers, Elena completed her weapon preparation and began calculating ranges to the various muzzle flashes she could see in the valley. Wind speed, precipitation, and declining light all had to be factored into shots that would need to be perfect on the first attempt. The criminals would scatter or take cover once they realized they were being engaged by a sniper, giving her limited opportunities to even the odds. The poacher's leader made a tactical decision that would prove fatal for his operation. Instead of maintaining pursuit and risking casualties to his team, He decided to surround the Rangers' position and wait for them to surrender or die of exposure in the storm. He ordered his men to establish a perimeter and prepare for a siege, confident that 4 lightly armed park rangers couldn't hold out for long against his experienced fighters. Tommy Martinez heard the footsteps of their pursuers slow and then stop, replaced by hushed conversations and the sound of equipment being positioned. The sudden quiet was more terrifying than the gunfire had been, suggesting that the poachers were preparing for a final assault or settling in for a prolonged siege. Either scenario seemed to spell doom for the exhausted Rangers. Elena chambered her first round and settled into a stable shooting position behind a natural rock rest. Through her scope, she could see the poachers moving into positions around the Rangers' location, unaware that they were now being hunted by one of the most skilled marksmen the U.S. Army had ever trained. The distance to her targets was well within her effective range, but the weather conditions and fading light would make each shot a test of her abilities. Sarah, Chen pressed herself against the rocks and tried to make herself invisible as voices grew closer to their hiding place. The evidence she carried could destroy the entire criminal network, but only if someone survived to deliver it to prosecutors. She could hear the poachers discussing their plans for the Rangers, and none of the options they mentioned involved anyone walking away alive. The first shot would come within minutes, and Elena Vasquez knew that success or failure would be measured in the lives of 4 brave people who had stumbled into a situation beyond their training and equipment. Her finger found the familiar curve of her trigger as she prepared to engage targets that had no idea death was already reaching for them through the scope of a precision rifle held by someone who had never failed to protect the innocent. Elena Vasquez controlled her breathing as she acquired her first target through the high-powered scope. The poacher was positioned behind a fallen tree, approximately 600 yards away, completely unaware that death was measuring the distance between them. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger as she made final calculations for wind drift and bullet drop in the deteriorating weather conditions. The radio traffic among the poachers revealed their confidence in the situation. They discussed plans for interrogating the Rangers about their communications with headquarters, then eliminating all witnesses before extracting from the area. Their leader was coordinating with someone else over a satellite phone, making arrangements for transportation and disposal of evidence. These weren't desperate criminals making panicked decisions. They were professionals executing a well-rehearsed plan. Rodriguez pressed his back against the cold stone and tried to assess their tactical situation. His team was trapped in a small circle of boulders with limited ammunition and no escape routes. The poachers had established overlapping fields of fire that would cut down anyone who tried to run. Their only advantage was the defensive position, but even that would become meaningless once their attackers coordinated a final assault. Tommy Martinez closed his eyes and tried to calm his racing heart. Through the gaps in the rocks, he could see movement as the poachers adjusted their positions. One of them was setting up what appeared to be a light machine gun on a bipod, aimed directly at their hiding place. The young ranger realized that when the final attack began, their small arms would be useless against that level of firepower. Elena made her final adjustments and exhaled slowly as her crosshairs settled on the machine gunner's center mass. This first shot would announce her presence to every criminal in the area, so it had to count. She squeezed the trigger with the same smooth motion she had perfected during hundreds of hours on military ranges, followed by thousands of rounds fired in combat situations where American lives depended on her accuracy. The rifle's thunderous report echoed across the valley like a crack of lightning, followed immediately by the distinctive sound of a high-velocity bullet finding its target. The machine gunner dropped instantly, his weapon clattering uselessly against the rocks as Elena's bullet tore through his chest with devastating effect. The other poachers froze for a crucial second, trying to locate the source of the shot that had just killed their teammate. Sarah Chen felt hope surge through her chest as the sound of the distant rifle shot reached their position. Someone else was in the fight, and the accuracy of that first shot suggested professional military training. She grabbed her radio and transmitted on the emergency frequency, hoping their unknown ally was monitoring communications. "Unknown sniper, this is Park Ranger Chen. We are pinned down and taking fire from multiple subjects. Can you confirm your position?" Elena worked the bolt of her rifle and chambered another round while scanning for her next target. The poachers were reacting exactly as she had expected, taking cover and trying to identify her location through muzzle flash and sound. But her position on the ridge gave her tactical advantages they couldn't overcome, and her military training in camouflage and concealment made her nearly invisible against the rocky background. The poacher's leader screamed orders at his remaining men, trying to regain control of a situation that had suddenly turned deadly. He had lost experienced fighters in Afghanistan and Iraq, but never expected to face military-grade opposition while hunting park rangers in the American wilderness. His satellite phone crackled to life as his handlers demanded an immediate status report on the operation. Big. Jim Thompson recognized the sound of precision rifle fire and felt a grim satisfaction as he watched the poachers scramble for cover. Whoever was shooting at their attackers knew their business, and the first shot had been perfectly placed to eliminate their most dangerous weapon. He signaled to his team that they might have a chance if they could coordinate with their unknown ally. Elena's second shot came 30 seconds after the first, targeting a poacher who had tried to flank the ranger's position. The bullet struck him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing into the underbrush with a scream that carried clearly across the valley. She had deliberately chosen a wounding shot to create chaos and force the other criminals to expose themselves while trying to help their injured teammate. Rodriguez keyed his radio and tried to establish contact with their mysterious supporter. "Unknown shooter, this is Sergeant Rodriguez, Park Ranger Service. We have wounded and need immediate assistance. Can you maintain fire support while we attempt to break out of this position?" The response came back clearly through the static, a calm female voice that carried absolute confidence. "Rangers, this is Elena Vasquez, former Army sniper and current mountain rescue volunteer. I have overwatch on your position and am engaging hostiles. Maintain your cover and let me work. I count 4 remaining targets in your immediate area. Help is coming, but you need to stay alive until it gets here." Tommy Martinez felt tears of relief running down his cheeks as he heard Elena's transmission. They weren't alone anymore. Someone with the skills and equipment to fight these criminals had found them in the wilderness and was evening the odds. He checked his pistol and prepared to support their ally if the opportunity presented itself. The poachers made a critical tactical error by trying to rush the ranger's position while Elena was reloading. 3 of them broke cover simultaneously, apparently believing they could overwhelm the defensive position before the sniper could engage again. They had no way of knowing that Elena had loaded a full magazine and was tracking their movement through her scope even as they charged across the open ground. Elena's third and fourth shots came in rapid succession, demonstrating the deadly efficiency that had made her legendary among military snipers. The first bullet dropped the lead attacker instantly, while the second caught his partner in the leg and sent him tumbling into a rocky ravine with a scream that ended abruptly when he struck the bottom. Sarah, Chen watched in amazement as the attack collapsed under Elena's precise fire. The remaining poachers were falling back in disorder, their confidence shattered by losses they hadn't anticipated. But she also noticed movement on the ridge where the original sniper had been positioned. One of the criminals was trying to locate Elena's position and return fire with his own precision weapon. The deadly game of cat and mouse between 2 military-trained snipers was about to begin. With the lives of 4 park rangers hanging in the balance, Elena had announced her presence and demonstrated her capabilities, but now she would face an opponent with similar training and equipment. The storm continued to intensify around them as thunder echoed across the mountains, masking the sound of gunshots that would determine who lived and who died in the Montana wilderness. The enemy sniper's first shot cracked past Elena's position, striking rock fragments that stung her cheek as she pressed herself lower against the granite outcropping. Through her scope, she had caught a muzzle flash from the opposite ridge and immediately recognized the tactical situation. She was now engaged in a deadly duel with another precision shooter, while 4 innocent lives depended on her ability to eliminate the threat. Rodriguez heard the distinctive whistle of high-velocity rounds passing overhead as the 2 snipers began their lethal exchange. The enemy marksman was trying to suppress Elena's position, while the remaining poachers regrouped for another assault on the Rangers. He realized their window of opportunity was closing rapidly. Either Elena eliminated the opposing sniper quickly, or they would all be dead within the hour. Elena calculated the distance to her opponent's position at approximately 800 meters across a windswept valley filled with swirling rain and fog. The conditions were challenging even for someone with her extensive combat experience, but she had made more difficult shots during her military service. She adjusted her scope settings and began the patient process of locating her target's exact position. Tommy Martinez watched in fascination and terror as tracer rounds from automatic weapons began raking the area around Elena's position. The remaining poachers were providing covering fire for their sniper, trying to distract Elena long enough for their marksman to make a killing shot. The young ranger realized he was witnessing a level of combat that most people only saw in war movies. The enemy sniper's second shot was closer, chipping granite just inches from Elena's rifle barrel. Her opponent was skilled and was rapidly zeroing in on her location. Elena knew she had perhaps 2 more opportunities before he found his range and ended the fight. She controlled her breathing and waited for the brief moment when the wind would calm between gusts. Sarah Chen monitored the radio traffic as various agencies coordinated their response to the crisis. FBI agents specializing in wildlife trafficking were en route from Denver, but weather conditions continued to prevent helicopter operations. Local law enforcement was still fighting through mountain roads that had become treacherous with rain and early snow. The 4 rangers and their unknown ally were on their own for at least another 2 hours. Big Jim Thompson noticed movement among the rocks below. Their position as surviving poachers tried to work their way closer under cover of the sniper duel. His military experience told him they were planning a coordinated assault timed to coincide with their marksman's next shot. He signaled to Rodriguez that they needed to prepare for incoming fire from multiple directions. Elena's patience paid off as a brief lull in the wind provided the perfect shooting conditions she had been waiting for. Through her scope, she could see the enemy sniper adjusting his position for what he believed would be his killing shot. Elena's crosshairs settled on a target she couldn't quite see clearly through the rain and mist, but years of combat experience had taught her to trust her instincts. The thunderous crack of Elena's rifle echoed across the valley just as lightning split the darkening sky above them. Her bullet crossed 800 meters of storm-swept wilderness in less than a second, finding its target with the precision that had made her one of the Army's most feared snipers. The enemy marksman's rifle fell silent, and his supporting fire ceased immediately as the remaining poachers realized their advantage had evaporated. Rodriguez felt the shift in momentum as the automatic weapons fire directed at Elena's position suddenly stopped. Through the rain, he could hear the surviving poachers calling frantically to their sniper, receiving only silence in response. The sergeant keyed his radio and transmitted to Elena, "Sniper down. Can you confirm the threat is neutralized?" Elena's voice came back steady and professional despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Target eliminated. I count 2 hostiles remaining mobile, 1 wounded. They appear to be falling back toward the northwest trail. Rangers, you need to move now while they're disorganized. I'll provide overwatch as you extract to higher ground." Tommy Martinez felt his legs shaking as he prepared to leave their rocky shelter. The sound of Elena's final shot had been like thunder from heaven, ending the deadly duel that could have killed them all, but he knew they weren't safe yet. The surviving poachers were desperate and dangerous, and their extraction route would expose them to potential ambush for several hundred meters. Sarah Chen secured her evidence files and prepared to move with the team. The documentation she carried could still bring down the entire criminal network, but only if they reached safety and could deliver it to federal prosecutors. She checked her radio equipment one final time, ensuring that their location and situation had been properly transmitted to all responding agencies. Big Jim Thompson took point as the 4 rangers began their dangerous movement toward higher ground. His military training kicked in as he scanned for potential ambush sites and covered areas where survivors might be hiding. Elena's sniper fire had broken the coordinated attack, but wounded and desperate criminals were often more dangerous than organized ones. The surviving poachers were indeed falling back, but their leader was making frantic calls on his satellite phone to arrange emergency extraction. The operation had gone catastrophically wrong, with multiple casualties and the certainty that law enforcement agencies across the region were converging on their location. But he still had one card left to play that could salvage something from the disaster. Elena maintained overwatch as the rangers moved through the treacherous terrain, her scope tracking potential threats while she provided security for their retreat. Through her binoculars, she could see emergency vehicles with flashing lights beginning to arrive at distant road access points. Help was finally coming, but they still had to survive the next hour in the wilderness with desperate criminals. The radio crackled with transmissions from multiple agencies, as the full scope of the operation became clear to authorities. The poaching ring was connected to an international wildlife trafficking network worth millions of dollars, with connections to organized crime families in 3 countries. The 4 park rangers had stumbled onto something much larger than anyone had realized. Rodriguez felt relief flooding through him as they reached a more defensible position on higher ground. From their new vantage point, they could see the lights of approaching rescue vehicles and hear the distant sound of helicopter engines fighting through the storm. Elena had bought them the time they needed to survive, and now professional help was finally within reach. Tommy Martinez looked back at the valley where they had nearly died and felt a profound appreciation for the stranger who had risked her life to save theirs. Elena Vasquez had appeared from nowhere like an angel of death, eliminating threats with precision that seemed almost supernatural. He wondered if he would ever be brave enough to put his life on the line for strangers the way she had done for them. The wounded poacher from Elena's earlier shot was found by searchers 3 hours later, barely alive and eager to cooperate with investigators in exchange for medical treatment and protection. His testimony would eventually lead to the arrest of 17 individuals across 4 states and the seizure of wildlife products worth over $12 million on the black market. Elena began the long hike back to her truck as the first rescue. Helicopters finally reached the ranger's position. She had done what needed to be done, just as she had countless times during her military service. The 4 park rangers would go home to their families, and the evidence they had gathered would help destroy a criminal network that had operated with impunity for too long. For Elena Vasquez, that was all the reward she needed. 3 months later, Elena Vasquez sat in a federal courtroom in Denver, watching as the last members of the international wildlife trafficking ring received their sentences. The evidence that Sarah Chen had risked her life to preserve had proven devastating to the criminal organization. 17 arrests across 4 states had dismantled a network that had operated for over a decade, generating millions in illegal profits from the slaughter of protected species. Rodriguez testified about the events in the Montana wilderness, his voice steady as he described how close his team had come to death at the hands of professional killers. The bullet scar on his arm served as a permanent reminder of that terrifying day when 4 park rangers had stumbled into a situation far beyond their training and equipment. His testimony helped ensure that several defendants received maximum sentences for attempted murder of federal officers. Tommy Martinez had requested a transfer to a desk job after the incident, finding that his idealistic view of ranger work had been shattered by the reality of facing armed criminals in remote wilderness areas. But as he listened to the prosecutor describe how their actions had prevented millions of dollars in wildlife trafficking, he felt a quiet pride in what they had accomplished. They had done their job despite impossible odds. Sarah Chen's photographs and documentation proved crucial in connecting the Montana operation to similar crimes across the western United States. Her evidence revealed a sophisticated network that had been systematically targeting protected species in national parks and wilderness areas. The FBI estimated that her courage in preserving that documentation had prevented the extinction of several endangered species. Big Jim Thompson returned to active duty but requested assignment to training new rangers in tactical situations and emergency response. His experience during the firefight had convinced him that park personnel needed better preparation for encounters with organized criminal operations. His training programs would eventually be adopted throughout the National Park Service. The surviving poacher who had been wounded by Elena's shot became a key witness for the prosecution, providing details about the organization's structure and methods that would have taken years to develop through traditional investigation. His testimony revealed connections to wildlife trafficking operations in Southeast Asia, Africa, and South America, leading to coordinated international arrests. Elena Vasquez declined multiple requests for interviews and book deals, preferring to return to her quiet life in the Montana mountains. She continued her volunteer work with mountain rescue operations, using her skills to help lost hikers and injured climbers. The 4 rangers she had saved sent her Christmas cards every year, but she rarely spoke about the events that had made her a hero to people she had never met. The federal prosecutor emphasized during closing arguments that the case represented more than just wildlife crimes. The defendants had been willing to murder law enforcement officers to protect their illegal operation, demonstrating the level of violence associated with international trafficking networks. Their conviction sent a message to criminal organizations that American wilderness areas would not be safe havens for their activities. Judge Catherine. Morrison imposed sentences ranging from 15 to 30 years in federal prison, with the leaders of the organization receiving the maximum penalties available under federal law. She noted that the defendants had shown a callous disregard for both wildlife conservation and human life, justifying the harsh sentences as necessary to deter similar crimes. The courtroom gallery was filled with representatives from environmental organizations, law enforcement agencies, and Native American tribes whose traditional hunting grounds had been violated by the trafficking network. Many of them had traveled hundreds of miles to witness the conclusion of a case that had personal significance for their communities and causes. Elena slipped out of the courtroom before the final sentencing, avoiding the reporters and photographers who wanted to document her presence. She had done what needed to be done that day in the wilderness, just as she had during her military service. The recognition and gratitude were appreciated, but they weren't why she had risked her life to save 4 strangers. Rodriguez found Elena in the parking lot outside the federal building and approached her with the quiet respect of one professional acknowledging another. They spoke briefly about the case and its conclusion, but both understood that some experiences couldn't be adequately expressed in words. She had saved his life and the lives of his team members, creating a debt that could never be fully repaid. The 4 Rangers attended a ceremony at Park Service headquarters where they received commendations for their role in dismantling the trafficking network. Tommy Martinez had returned from his desk assignment for the occasion, finding that the months since the incident had given him a new perspective on his brush with death and his responsibilities as a law enforcement officer. Sarah Chen's evidence continued to generate new cases as investigators followed leads to other criminal operations. Her photographs had captured details that proved crucial in identifying suspects and methods used by traffickers across multiple jurisdictions. The impact of her courage during those terrifying hours in the wilderness would continue to protect wildlife for years to come. As Elena drove back toward the Montana mountains, she reflected on the unexpected ways that her military training continued to serve her community. She had expected to leave her sniper skills behind when she retired from the Army, but fate had brought her to a ridge overlooking 4 people who desperately needed someone with her particular abilities. The thunderous echo of her rifle shots had saved 4 lives and helped preserve the wilderness she had grown to love. The radio in her truck picked up a transmission from a mountain rescue operation, and Elena automatically noted the coordinates and began calculating the best route to provide assistance. Her war was over, but her service to others would continue as long as people needed help in the remote places where she had found peace and purpose after years of conflict.